Sign it, or I'll make sure you and that baby have nothing." Nathan Caldwell dropped the divorce papers onto the kitchen table and slid them across to his wife, 7 months pregnant, still in her robe, barefoot on the cold tile floor. Claire looked down at the papers, then up at him. He didn't blink. She picked up the pen, held it, then set it back down. "Nathan," she said quietly, "you have no idea who you're threatening." He laughed, actually laughed, grabbed his briefcase and walked out the door. He had just made the most catastrophically expensive mistake of his life, and he wouldn't understand that until it was far too late. If you're watching this right now, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next will absolutely shock you. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The morning Nathan Caldwell decided to end his marriage, he woke up feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Relief. That was the word he would never say out loud. Not to his executive team, not to his business partner Marcus Webb, not even to Victoria Hale, the woman who had slowly, carefully, intentionally become the most important person in his professional life, and if he was honest with himself, something more than that. He had rehearsed the moment 100 times in his head. He had told himself it was the right decision. He had told himself Claire would understand eventually. He had told himself that sometimes two people simply grew in different directions, and that divorce was not a failure, it was a correction. He had a lot of things he told himself, but when he walked into that kitchen at 7:45 in the morning and saw Claire standing at the counter in her robe, one hand resting on her belly and the other wrapped around a mug of herbal tea. She drank because coffee bothered her now. Something moved through him that he quickly pushed back down. He set the papers on the table. He watched her eyes drop to them. He watched her face go very still. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, almost careful. "You know what it is, Claire." She looked up at him. Her eyes were brown warm, the kind of eyes that had always made him feel seen in a way that used to comfort him and now made him deeply uncomfortable. "I know what it looks like," she said. "I'm asking you to tell me what it is." "It's divorce papers." She set down her mug slowly. "Nathan, I am 7 months pregnant." "I know. With your child." "I know that too." The silence between them was enormous. It had weight. It had texture. It filled the entire kitchen. "When did you decide this?" she asked. He clasped his hands in front of him. "Claire, we've been struggling for a long time. We both know that. This isn't coming out of nowhere." "I didn't ask when the marriage started struggling," she said. "I asked when you decided to end it." I didn't answer her. He couldn't. Because the honest answer was, he had decided somewhere around the 3rd time he and Victoria had stayed late in the office together, ordering dinner and talking for hours about the future of Caldwell Innovations, laughing in the way that people laugh when they feel completely understood. He had decided somewhere in the quiet space between what was real and what he was pretending. "I think we want different things," he said finally. Claire looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her stomach. Her hand moved in a slow, gentle circle, the way it always did when she was calming herself. "Different things," she repeated softly. "Yes. Nathan, 3 months ago, you told me you wanted this baby more than anything you'd ever wanted in your life. I have that on a voicemail you left me from the hospital waiting room the night I had that scare in my 2nd trimester. You left me a voicemail that lasted 6 minutes. You cried in it." He said nothing. "What changed?" she asked. And he did the thing she would never forget. He straightened his jacket, he picked up his briefcase, and he said, "My attorney will be in touch." Then he walked out. Claire stood alone in the kitchen for almost 4 minutes without moving. She didn't cry. She didn't reach for her phone. She just stood there with her hand on her stomach and her tea going cold on the counter. Then she picked up her phone. She found the contact she hadn't used in 6 years, the one she had promised herself she would never use unless she had no other choice. Her father. She pressed dial. It rang twice. "Claire." His voice was the same as she remembered, deep, unhurried, the voice of a man who had learned long ago that panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. "Is everything all right?" "No," she said. "It's not." A pause. "Dad, it's time. I need to come home." Another pause. Longer. Then, "I'll send the car." She hung up. She looked around the kitchen she had spent 3 years making feel like a home. She looked at the photographs on the refrigerator and the herbs growing in the window box, and the small framed quote above the sink that she had bought at a farmer's market in Vermont the first summer she and Nathan were married, because it had made her laugh so hard she nearly choked on her apple cider. Then she went upstairs and began to pack. Nathan did not expect to feel anything driving away from the house. He expected the relief to settle in cleanly the way it did after a difficult quarterly earnings call or a tense board negotiation. He expected to feel the particular clarity that came from making a hard decision and following through with it. Instead, he felt a low, persistent unease that he couldn't quite locate. He shook it off. He had a company to run. Caldwell Innovations had started in a 2-bedroom apartment in Austin 8 years ago. Nathan had built it from nothing, from a borrowed laptop and a maxed-out credit card, and an idea that most of his former colleagues at the time had called ambitious in the way people call things ambitious when they actually mean delusional. He had built it into one of the fastest-growing technology companies in America, with offices in 4 cities, over 2,000 employees, and a valuation that made financial journalists use words like stunning and meteoric. He had done that. He had built that. And he had done it, he reminded himself, largely on his own. When he arrived at the Caldwell Innovations headquarters in downtown Chicago that morning, his executive assistant Priya was waiting for him with his schedule and a coffee, and the expression she wore when something was wrong, but she wasn't sure how wrong. "Good morning," she said carefully. "Morning," he said. "What's the problem?" "No problem," she said. Then, "Victoria asked me to let you know she moved your 11 o'clock to 10:30. She said it was important." Victoria Hale was Caldwell Innovations' Executive Vice President of Strategy. She had joined the company 3 years ago from a consulting firm in New York, and in 3 years she had done things with the company's strategic direction that Nathan genuinely respected. She was sharp, focused, ambitious, in a way that Nathan found energizing rather than threatening. And she had a gift for seeing around corners, for spotting problems and opportunities before anyone else in the room had registered they existed. She was also, if Nathan was being honest with himself, the primary reason his marriage had stopped feeling like a marriage and had started feeling like a very politely maintained arrangement. I didn't think he and Victoria had done anything wrong. Not technically. There had been no affair in the way most people define the word. There had been late nights and long conversations and the quiet understanding that passes between two people who have decided, without ever quite saying it out loud, that they belong in each other's orbit. But he knew what Claire had seen. He knew what the late nights looked like from the outside. He knew what it felt like to be the person watching from the other side of the glass. He just hadn't let himself think about that very much. Victoria was waiting in the small conference room off his office when he arrived. She was standing at the window with her arms crossed and her phone in her hand, and she turned when he came in with an expression that said she had something urgent to tell him. "I heard," she said immediately. He stopped. "What?" "Priya told me. The papers." She paused. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said. "Nathan." "Victoria, I'm fine. What did you want to discuss?" She studied him for a moment. Then she made a decision, set her phone on the table, and switched gears with the efficiency he had always admired. "The Hartwell acquisition," she said. "I got a call late last night from someone inside their board. There may be a competing offer." "From who?" "That's what I'm trying to find out." She pulled up something on her laptop. The source was careful, but the name that came up was Blackstone Meridian. Nathan sat down slowly. "Blackstone Meridian Capital. You know them?" "I know of them," he said. "I've never done business with them directly. They're an aggressive private investment group. They don't build things. They acquire and dismantle." He looked at her. "Why would Blackstone Meridian want Hartwell? Hartwell is a software infrastructure company. There's no asset to strip there. The value is entirely in the platform and the team." "Exactly," Victoria said. They looked at each other across the table. "Unless Hartwell isn't the target," Nathan said slowly. Victoria nodded once. "That was my thought." He sat back. Something that might have been alarm moved through him. "If they used Hartwell as a foothold and then they're not after Hartwell," Victoria said. "They're after us." Nathan did not tell anyone at the company about the divorce papers. He told himself it was because it wasn't relevant. Personal matters didn't belong in the professional space. His people had work to do, and they didn't need to be distracted by his domestic situation. The truth was something closer to the fact that saying the words out loud would make them real in a way that they hadn't quite become yet. He went home that evening to a house that was exactly as he had left it. Except Claire wasn't there. He noticed immediately before he even made it past the front door in the particular way a space changes when someone who has been filling it quietly for years is suddenly gone. The house had the same furniture, the same art on the walls, the same faint smell of the eucalyptus candles Claire burned in the evenings, but something essential was absent, some quality of aliveness. I went to the kitchen. The herbal tea was still on the counter, cold and untouched. The divorce papers were gone. He went upstairs to the bedroom. Her closet was partially cleared, not packed in the urgent, frantic way of someone who had fled in distress, but in the deliberate, careful way of someone who had known exactly what she was taking and what she was leaving behind. She had left the photographs on the nightstand, both of them, the one from their wedding and the one from the ultrasound. Nathan stood in the doorway of his own bedroom and looked at those photographs for a long time. Then he went downstairs and poured himself a drink and did not think about them anymore. Claire went back to the Whitmore estate for the first time in 6 years. The house itself had not changed. It sat on 40 acres in the Connecticut countryside, a Georgian mansion that her grandfather had built in 1962, and her father had filled with books and antiques and the kind of quiet grandeur that came from old money that had never needed to announce itself. Edward Whitmore was waiting on the front steps when the car pulled in. I was 71 years old, white-haired, lean in the way of men who had never stopped moving, with sharp gray eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that Claire had inherited in their color and expression, if not their prescription. He was not a demonstrative man. He had never been the father who scooped his children up and swung them around, but he was the father who showed up, always, consistently, in every way that mattered. When Claire stepped out of the car and he saw the full extent of her pregnancy for the first time in person, she had told him on the phone, but he had not seen it. Something passed through his expression that was as close to devastation as Edward Whitmore ever allowed himself to appear. He came down the steps and took her hands in both of his. "You look," he said carefully, "like your mother." "Don't make me cry," she said. "I'm not trying to." He squeezed her hands. "Come inside. Mrs. Hargrove made soup." They sat in the study, the room that had always been the heart of the house, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a fire that was never quite all the way out, and Claire ate soup, and her father drank tea, and for a long time neither of them said the thing they needed to say. Finally, her father set down his cup. "Tell me what happened." So she did. She told him everything. The change she had noticed in Nathan over the past 2 years, the way his attention had narrowed until it felt like she was standing outside a window, watching him live a life she was no longer part of. The discovery of the emails she hadn't been looking for, but had stumbled onto, not compromising in any legal sense, but intimate in a way that had made her stomach drop. The conversation that hadn't gone well, and the argument that had been worse, and the long, terrible weeks of silence that had followed. And then the papers. Her father listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "He doesn't know," he said finally. It wasn't a question. "No," Claire said. "I never told him." "Why not?" She looked at her father. "Because I wanted him to love me for what was actually there, not for what was behind me." Edward Whitmore looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. "I understand that," he said. "I do. But Claire, the world is going to find out now. You know that. The moment you come back here officially, the moment your name goes back on any document connected to the trust." "I know," she said. "Nathan Caldwell will be as surprised as anyone." "He made his choices, Dad," she said quietly. "He knew exactly who he thought I was when he made them. I can't control what he learns after." Her father studied her. "And what do you want from this? What do you actually want?" Claire looked down at her hands. At the wedding ring she was still wearing, which she hadn't quite been able to take off yet, though she understood she would have to. "I want my son to be safe," she said. "I want to be able to build a life that isn't defined by what Nathan decided I was worth." A pause. "And I want to make sure that the choices I make from here are mine, not because I was forced, not because I was angry, because I chose them." Her father was quiet. "Dad," she said, "what's happening with the trust? You said on the phone there were things I needed to know." Edward Whitmore stood up and went to the window. Outside, the Connecticut countryside was going gold and gray in the early evening light. Your grandfather built the Whitmore Legacy Trust over 40 years, he said. You know the history, you know what it represents. What you don't know, what I never told you because you made it clear you didn't want to know, is that over the past several years, the trust has accumulated a significant position in a number of technology companies. He paused, including one you're quite familiar with. Claire went very still. Her father turned to look at her. Caldwell Innovations, he said. We've been a silent minority shareholder since the company was 18 months old. We invested when Nathan was still operating out of a 2-bedroom apartment before his first round of institutional funding. Your grandfather actually made the call. He said the founder had extraordinary instincts. The room was very quiet. How much? Claire asked carefully. Enough to matter, her father said. We never activated the position. We never made ourselves known. We've held it as a protective measure. A protective measure, Claire repeated. For you, he said quietly, because I knew you were in that company's life, even if the company didn't know it. And I wanted to make sure that if things ever went wrong, you would never be without options. Claire stared at him. Something was building in her chest that was complicated and layered, and that she didn't have words for yet. Dad, she said slowly, are you telling me that for the entirety of my marriage to Nathan Caldwell, our family has held a significant silent stake in his company? Yes, her father said simply, and he never knew. He never knew. Claire sat back against the cushions of the old leather sofa and pressed her hand against her stomach and looked at the ceiling. That, she said finally, is a great deal to process. I know, her father said. Take your time. I'll need more soup, she said. Despite everything, despite the divorce papers still sitting in her bag, despite the enormity of what she was just learning, despite the way her son was pressing against her ribs in a way that felt like punctuation. She almost laughed. Mrs. Hargrove made a lot of soup, her father said. The weeks that followed were both simpler and more complicated than Claire had expected. Simpler because the Whitmore estate had a rhythm and a warmth that she had forgotten, the kind that came from a house where people had lived fully and completely across generations. Mrs. Hargrove, who had been the estate's housekeeper since before Claire was born, treated the return of the pregnant daughter with the focused, practical tenderness of someone who understood exactly what was needed and was quietly making sure it happened. More complicated because of the trust. Her father's legal team began the formal process of transferring certain aspects of the trust's management to Claire's direct oversight. They were careful and deliberate about it, and they made sure she understood every step, every document, every decision. She had always been intelligent with money, not in the inherited way of people who had grown up surrounded by it, but in the practical, earned way of someone who had managed her own finances carefully and studied the markets out of genuine interest. She absorbed the information about the trust, the way she absorbed everything thoroughly without rushing, and with the particular attention of someone who understood that what she was learning was not abstract. It was power, real, concrete, significant power, and she had never wanted it for herself. But she was beginning to understand that the question of what she wanted for herself was no longer the only question she needed to be asking. Her son was coming. In 2 months, maybe less, and whatever world she brought him into, whatever decisions she made, now would shape the world he inherited. She read through the files her father's team prepared for her on Caldwell Innovations, with the same care she gave everything else. And 3 weeks before her son was born, she found something that made her set down every other document she was holding and reach for her phone. Dad, she said when he picked up, I need to talk to you about Blackstone Meridian Capital. A pause. What about them? They're making a move, she said. Not on Hartwell, on Caldwell Innovations directly. I found the preliminary filings in the Trust's intelligence briefings. Dad, if they complete this acquisition. I know, her father said quietly. You already know. I've known for a month, he said. I was waiting until after the baby to bring it to you. Dad, she took a breath. How many people are we talking about? If Blackstone breaks up that company, how many employees? As of last quarter, 2,314, her father said. Claire was quiet. Claire, her father said gently, what are you thinking? She looked out the window of the sitting room where she had been working at the old oak tree her grandfather had planted the year her father was born. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that I have never used what this family has to hurt anyone. No, her father agreed, and I'm not going to start now. A beat. Not even the man who walked out of my kitchen with his briefcase and couldn't look me in the eye." Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need from me?" "Time," she said, "and access." "Both of those," he said, "you already have." William Edward Whitmore was born on a Tuesday morning in March, 6 pounds 11 ounces, with his mother's eyes and a voice that, according to the delivering nurse, he was not at all shy about using. Claire held him in the recovery room with her father sitting in the chair beside the bed and Mrs. Hargrove hovering in the doorway, having a feeling she would have described if pressed as completely professional. "Hello," Claire said quietly to her son. "I'm your mom. I know you haven't had the easiest few months. I'm sorry about that." She smoothed his dark hair. "But I want you to know something. Whatever comes next, and a lot of things are coming, I am not going to make any of my decisions from a place of fear or anger. I'm going to make them the way your grandfather taught me, carefully, honestly, with the long view in mind." William, for his part, appeared to be listening. "You have a father," she continued softly. "He made some choices I'm still deciding how I feel about, but you don't have to decide anything about him yet. That's between you two, and it'll happen in its own time." A pause. "Right now, all you have to do is exist. I've got everything else." Her father in the chair beside the bed took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He would have said if anyone had asked that there was something in the air that was making them water. No one asked. Nathan Caldwell learned his son had been born from Priya, who had seen a brief announcement in a society column, a small item noting that Claire Whitmore Caldwell had given birth to a son at a private hospital in Connecticut. He sat with his phone in his hand for a long time after reading it. Then Victoria knocked on his office door and came in with reports about the Blackstone Meridian situation, which had escalated in ways that were making his executive team increasingly nervous, and the moment passed. He told himself he would reach out to Claire about arrangements. He did not reach out to Claire. He told himself he was waiting for the right time. There was never a right time. And the Blackstone Meridian situation was getting worse. The financial press noticed something strange in the second week of April. It started with a small item in a trade publication, a note that an unusual volume of Caldwell Innovation shares had changed hands in a way that didn't quite fit the pattern of normal market activity. The journalist who wrote the item didn't know what it meant yet, but he flagged it, and other journalists noticed the flag. By the third week of April, the question had shifted from "something unusual is happening" to "who is doing this and why?" By the first week of May, someone had dug into the corporate filing records deeply enough to find a name: the Whitmore Legacy Trust. And connected to the Whitmore Legacy Trust, after 3 more days of filing excavations, and a source inside a Connecticut law firm who probably shouldn't have said what they said, a name that no one in the financial world had connected to Caldwell Innovations before: Claire Whitmore, the daughter of Edward Whitmore, the last heir of the most powerful private investment family no one had ever quite managed to fully see. The story broke on a Wednesday morning at 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time in a piece in the Wall Street Journal that began with the words, "The woman the CEO of Caldwell Innovations divorced may be the most significant undisclosed shareholder in the history of the company he built." By 7:15, Nathan Caldwell's phone had received 43 messages. By 7:20, he was standing in his kitchen, the same kitchen where he had left the divorce papers 4 months ago, reading the article with a feeling he could not name. It was not guilt exactly. It was not shame exactly. It was the precise, particular vertigo of someone who has believed a story about themselves for years and is suddenly confronted with evidence that the story was missing most of its essential facts. He called Marcus Webb. "Tell me you've seen this," Nathan said when Marcus picked up. "I've seen it," Marcus said. "My question is why you haven't." "I don't know what you mean." "I mean," Marcus said carefully, "that this is your ex-wife Nathan, the woman you've been married to for 8 years, and none of this is information you had." Silence. "She never told you," Marcus said. "It wasn't a question this time." "No," Nathan said. "Why not?" Nathan thought about Claire's face in the kitchen on the morning he had left, the stillness of it, the way her eyes had stayed completely steady while everything else in the world was breaking. "Because she wanted to be loved for who she actually was," he said slowly, "not for what was behind her." The line was quiet. "Nathan," Marcus said finally, "I think you need to make some calls." "I know," Nathan said. He stood alone in his kitchen for a long moment. Through the window, the city moved and hummed and went about its business with complete indifference to the fact that Nathan Caldwell was standing in his kitchen, beginning to understand that the most significant person in his professional life and the most significant person in his personal life had for 8 years been the same woman, and he had spent those 8 years failing to see her. The phone buzzed in his hand, an email notification, his attorney, and then another buzz, his CFO, and then another. The board chair. The world was calling. And somewhere in Connecticut, Claire Whitmore was feeding her son and reading the same news he was reading and making decisions that would determine whether the company he had built survived what was coming next. He just didn't know that yet. That night, for the first time since the morning he had driven away from that house, Nathan Caldwell could not sleep. He lay in the dark of his bedroom and looked at the ceiling and thought about a woman standing in a kitchen with her hand on her stomach watching him walk away. He thought about a voicemail he had left from a hospital waiting room 6 minutes long, his voice cracking, telling her that he wanted this child more than he had ever wanted anything. He thought about what it meant that she had never told him, not as a betrayal, not as a deception, but as protection, as the careful, considered choice of someone who had decided from the very beginning that what was real between them had to be earned and not assumed, and he had failed to earn it. That was the thought that stayed with him as the hours passed and the city quieted outside his window. Not that she had hidden something from him, but that she had offered him everything that mattered herself, her presence, her loyalty, her care, and he had been so focused on the empire he was building that he had forgotten to look at what he already had. Somewhere in Connecticut, William Edward Whitmore was sleeping in a house full of books and history and a grandmother's soup and a great-grandfather's oak tree. And his mother was already planning how to save a company full of 2,300 people from a group of investors who didn't see human beings when they looked at a balance sheet. She was doing it not for the man who left her. She was doing it because it was the right thing to do, and that Nathan Caldwell would come to understand was the truest and most devastating thing about Claire Whitmore. She had always been like that. He just hadn't been paying attention. 3 days after Nathan walked out of that kitchen, Claire Whitmore sat across from her father's lead attorney in the East Wing study of the Whitmore estate and signed the first document that formally transferred operational oversight of the trust's domestic investment portfolio into her name. Her hand didn't shake. And Richard Calloway, who had been managing the Whitmore family's legal affairs for 26 years and had seen things that would have broken, most people watched her sign and said nothing for a moment. Then he slid the second document across the mahogany desk. "This one covers the board authorization," he said. She signed it. "And this one? I know what this one is, Richard," she said quietly. He stopped. "Of course." She signed that one too. When she set down the pen, Richard gathered the documents carefully and said, "Claire, I want you to know that your grandfather anticipated this moment. He wrote a letter, for you specifically. He asked that it be delivered when you formally took your seat." He paused. "Would you like to read it now or—" "Now," she said. He handed her an envelope, old paper ivory-colored, sealed with the Whitmore family crest in dark red wax. Her grandfather had been dead for 11 years. She had been 19 the last time she heard his voice. She broke the seal. The letter was 3 paragraphs long. His handwriting was deliberate and slightly old-fashioned, the handwriting of a man who had learned penmanship in an era when it was considered a form of character. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of her cardigan directly over her heart. "Thank you, Richard," she said. "Of course," he said. "Is there anything else you need today?" She looked at the stack of briefing documents on the desk in front of her. The Caldwell Innovations Position Summary, the Blackstone Meridian Intelligence Report, the shareholder analysis her father's team had prepared over the past month updated with current market data. "Yes," she said. "I need everything you have on Blackstone Meridian's acquisition timeline, their financing structure, and the names of every board member at Caldwell Innovations who has had contact with them in the last 6 months." Richard Calloway, who had been a lawyer for 30 years and thought he had stopped being surprised by anything, blinked. "All of that," he said. "All of it," she confirmed. "By tomorrow morning." He nodded slowly. "I'll have my team work through the night." "Thank you," she said. And then, because she was her mother's daughter as much as her father's, "Please make sure they order real food, not just coffee." Richard almost smiled. "I'll see to it." She watched him go. Then she looked down at the documents on the desk and pressed her hand against her stomach where her son was moving in the slow, rolling way he had been doing for weeks, and said very softly to no one in particular, "Okay, let's figure out what we're dealing with." The next 6 weeks were the most concentrated period of focused work Claire had done in her adult life. She woke early and worked through the morning briefings her father's team delivered each day with her coffee. She spent afternoons on calls with analysts, attorneys, and 2 former members of the Caldwell Innovations Board whose relationships with the company she had quietly researched and found to be more complicated than the public record suggested. She spent evenings with her father asking questions and pushing back on his answers in a way that clearly surprised him and just as clearly made him proud. She did not contact Nathan. Nathan, for his part, made no contact either. His attorney sent paperwork. Her attorney responded to it. The machinery of a legal separation ground forward with the impersonal efficiency of a process that had been designed to reduce the dissolution of human relationships to a series of manageable forms. Claire signed what needed to be signed. She contested what needed to be contested. She was not vindictive and she was not passive. She was precise. The one conversation she and Nathan had directly in those 6 weeks lasted 4 minutes and 20 seconds. She knew because she timed it. He called on a Thursday evening. She was reading when her phone lit up with his name, and she sat with it in her hand for 2 full rings before she answered. "Claire," he said. "Nathan." A pause. "How are you feeling?" 7 months pregnant and living in my father's house because my husband served me with divorce papers 3 weeks ago," she said. "How do you think I'm feeling?" Another pause. Longer. "I wanted to talk about arrangements. For the baby. After. My attorney has communicated our position on that," she said. "I don't want to do this through attorneys." "Then you should have thought about that before you served me papers and told me I had 48 hours to vacate a house while carrying your child." The silence on the other end of the line was the kind that had weight. She could hear him breathing. "Claire, Nathan." Her voice was quiet, but it was not soft. "I am not angry at you. I want you to hear that because I think you're expecting anger, and I'm not going to give it to you. But I am also not going to make this easier than it is. You made choices. We're both living with them now." A pause. "Is there something specific you needed?" He didn't answer for a moment. Then, "Is the baby okay?" And something in her chest moved despite everything, because that at least was real. "Yes," she said. "He's okay." Another pause. Yes." She heard him take a breath, a longer one. "Okay," he said finally. His voice was different, quieter. "Okay, I'm glad." "Good night, Nathan," she said. She hung up and sat in the quiet of the library for a long time, looking at the call timer on her screen, 4 minutes and 20 seconds. She set the phone down and went back to her reading. Meanwhile, in Chicago, the Blackstone Meridian situation was accelerating faster than anyone at Caldwell Innovations had anticipated. Victoria Hale had assembled a small crisis team that worked in a conference room on the executive floor and operated for all practical purposes like a war room. She had brought in an outside financial advisor named David Cho, who specialized in hostile takeover defense, and the 2 of them had spent the better part of 2 weeks mapping out exactly how Blackstone Meridian was positioning itself. It was not good. "They're not coming at us directly," David Cho told Nathan at a meeting in the 2nd week of April. "They're doing it in layers. The Hartwell move was the first layer get a foothold in a company with strategic integration points to Caldwell's platform. Then they use that position to build a case to certain shareholders that a merger makes structural sense." "And the shareholders they're talking to," Nathan said. "Which ones?" David exchanged a glance with Victoria. "That's the part that's going to be uncomfortable to hear," Victoria said. "Tell me." "Reeves and Hutchinson," she said. Nathan went very still. Gerald Reeves and Paul Hutchinson were 2 of Caldwell Innovations' 5 board members. They had been with the company since the Series B funding round. Nathan had considered them allies. He had considered them in the way that founders sometimes dangerously consider their early investors, something close to friends. "You're sure," he said. "David's contact at the SEC flagged communication patterns that are—" Victoria stopped. "Nathan, we're sure." Nathan stood up and went to the window. Outside, the Chicago skyline did its indifferent thing. "How long?" he asked. "At least 4 months," David said carefully. "Possibly longer." 4 months, which meant it had been happening before the divorce papers, before Victoria's first warning about Blackstone Meridian, before he had been paying any attention to anything except the deterioration of his marriage and the growing gravitational pull of his feelings for the woman sitting across the table from him right now. He had been looking the wrong direction for months, and while he was looking away, someone had been carefully, methodically setting up a play to take his company apart. "What do we need to do?" he asked. "We need to find a significant friendly shareholder," David said. "Someone with enough of a position to make a competing block that neutralizes Blackstone's play. If we can demonstrate consolidated friendly ownership of over 40%, the math stops working for them and they walk." "And do we have a significant friendly shareholder?" Nathan asked. David Cho looked at his papers. Victoria looked at her hands. Neither of them answered immediately. "Someone does," David said carefully. "We just don't know yet who it is or whether they'd be willing to act." What none of them knew in that conference room in downtown Chicago on a Tuesday afternoon in April was that 60 miles away in Connecticut, Claire Whitmore had already read the same analysis and had already begun thinking about the same question from the other side. 3 days later, the Wall Street Journal story broke. Nathan read it at 7:15 in the morning, standing in his kitchen in his dress shirt and socks, and the world rearranged itself. The story was precise and thoroughly reported. It named the Whitmore Legacy Trust. It named Edward Whitmore. And it named his daughter Claire Whitmore, currently separated from Nathan Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Innovations, as the primary heir and newly activated operational principal of the trust. It also noted with the particular careful language of financial journalism that the trust's position in Caldwell Innovations was, quote, substantial. Nathan put his phone down on the counter. He picked it up again, read the article again, put it down again. His phone started buzzing. Marcus Webb, then Priya, then David Cho, then Gerald Reeves, which Nathan noticed with a distinct and cold clarity was interesting timing on Gerald's part. He did not answer Gerald Reeves. He stood in his kitchen and thought about 8 years. He thought about the first time he had met Claire at a gallery opening in New York, when she had been standing in front of a painting he didn't understand and had explained it to him with such genuine, unself-conscious enthusiasm that he had asked for her number before he had consciously decided to do it. He thought about the way she used to sit cross-legged on the floor of whatever apartment or house they were living in, with documents spread around her, working through something with the focused intensity of a person who genuinely loved the process of understanding. He thought about the fact that she had a mind like a precision instrument, and he had spent years watching it work without ever quite registering what he was seeing. She had never told him, not once, not a hint, not a slip. For 8 years, the woman he was married to had been connected to a family fortune that dwarfed his own, and she had lived alongside him in a house he owned and driven a car he paid for, and attended events as his wife. And she had done all of it, not because she needed it, but because she chose it, because she had chosen him. And he had chosen 4 months ago to hand her divorce papers across a kitchen table. His phone buzzed again. "Victoria." He answered it. "Tell me you've read it," she said immediately. "I've read it," he said. "Nathan, if the trust moves to protect its position, if Claire decides to activate, I know." "Do you?" She paused. "Because I want to make sure we're thinking about this clearly. This is not just about the personal situation. If she decides to use her position aggressively, she won't," he said. A short silence. "How do you know that?" "I thought about the phone call 3 weeks ago. 4 minutes and 20 seconds. I am not angry at you. You made choices. We're both living with them now." "Because it's not how she operates," he said. "Nathan, we don't actually know how she operates in this context. We didn't even know she had a context like this." That landed. He stood with it for a moment. She was right. He didn't know. He had thought he knew his wife. He had thought he understood her world, understood the shape and limits of her life. And he had been catastrophically, fundamentally wrong. "Set up a meeting," he said. "The full crisis team, 10 o'clock. "Already done," Victoria said. Of course it was. He hung up and looked around his kitchen, at the counter where Claire's cold tea had sat the morning he left, at the table where he had dropped the papers without looking at her face, at the window she had hung herbs in that were still there, still growing because he had never gotten around to removing them. He thought about his son. A boy. Somewhere in Connecticut, a boy who was 6 weeks from being born, who had his father's name, whether his father deserved it or not. I thought about what he was actually afraid of, and for the first time in a long time, he made himself look at it directly. He wasn't afraid of losing the company. He was afraid that he deserved to. The crisis meeting that morning was the most uncomfortable 2 hours Nathan Caldwell had spent in a boardroom since the near bankruptcy in Caldwell Innovations' second year. David Cho laid out the full picture of Blackstone Meridian's play, and it was worse than Nathan had understood from the first briefings. They had been building toward this for almost 8 months. They had financial commitments from 3 institutional investors who believed the story Blackstone was telling, which was that Caldwell Innovations was underleveraged, that its assets could be restructured to generate significantly higher returns, and that its current leadership, meaning Nathan, was too emotionally attached to his team and his culture to make the hard decisions a restructuring required. In other words, they were selling the idea that Nathan's decency was a liability. And Reeves and Hutchinson, Nathan said. They've committed, soft committed, David said. They haven't signed anything, which means there's still time, but they're talking to Blackstone's people daily. What about the other 2 board members? Nathan asked. Chen is with you, Victoria said. Absolutely. Morrison, I believe, is with you, but she's nervous, and she'll need to be convinced that we have a path. Then convince her, Nathan said. What does she need to see? She needs to see a friendly shareholder block, David said. One big enough that the Blackstone math breaks down, something in the 38 to 42% range of outstanding shares. He paused, which brings us back to the question we couldn't answer yesterday. Everyone in the room understood what he meant. Nathan looked at the table. The Whitmore Trust position, he said. According to the journal piece, it's substantial, David said carefully. If it's in the range we think it might be, and if they chose to align with management rather than remain neutral. It ends the play, Nathan said flatly. It ends the play, David confirmed. The room was quiet. Victoria was looking at Nathan with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not the sharp strategic focus she usually wore in a crisis. Something more personal than that. Something that was almost, he thought, an apology. You're going to have to talk to her, Victoria said. I know. Not through attorneys. I know that too. She held his gaze. Nathan, for what it's worth, I think... She stopped, started again. I think the situation has been more complicated than either of us handled well, and I think whatever conversation you have with Claire needs to happen without me being part of the background noise. She said it quietly, directly, and without flinching. I've already spoken to HR about restructuring my role. The room was very still. Nathan looked at her. Victoria. It's the right thing, she said simply. You know it is. He did know it. He had known it for a while and hadn't said it, and the fact that she had said it first was something he would think about for a long time. We can talk about that separately, he said. Let's finish the briefing. They finished the briefing. He made decisions. He gave direction. He was what he had always been in a crisis, focused and clear and capable. But when the meeting ended and the room cleared and he was left alone, he sat at the head of his own conference table and thought about a woman in Connecticut who had just learned, if she hadn't already known, that she held the future of his company in her hands. He needed to call her. He knew that. The business situation alone required it. But he also knew that if he called her with the business situation as his opening, if the first real conversation they had was framed as a negotiation rather than anything human, he would be making the same mistake he had always made. He would be treating what was actually important as secondary to what was merely urgent. He picked up his phone. He put it down. He picked it up again. He called her. She answered on the 3rd ring. Nathan, she said. Her voice was even. Careful. Claire. He stopped, started again. I read the story this morning. So did most of America, apparently. I wanted to. He stopped again. I don't know how to do this, he said. I don't know what the right way to say any of this is. A pause. Then don't try to say the right thing, she said. Just say the true thing. He closed his eyes. I didn't know, he said. And I understand if you don't believe that. I understand if it sounds like I'm saying it because of what the story means for the company. But Claire, I genuinely did not know. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out how you managed to be exactly who you were for 8 years and never... He stopped. How did you do that? She was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was a little different. Not warmer exactly, but more real. Because it was never the important part, she said. The money, the name, the trust. None of that was the part I wanted you to know. I wanted you to know me. The actual me. A pause. You stopped doing that about 2 years ago. That was when I started to lose you, not when the papers arrived. He had nothing to say to that, because she was right and he knew she was right, and hearing it said that plainly was more painful than anything a hostile takeover attempt had ever made him feel. I want to see my son, he said finally. She didn't answer immediately. I'm not saying that as leverage, he added quickly. I'm not trying to— I know, she said. Nathan, I know. She took a breath. He's not here yet. 6 more weeks, give or take. Another pause. But yes, when he arrives, you should be there. Whatever else is happening between us, he deserves to have his father there. Something moved through Nathan's chest that was complicated and enormous, and that he recognized distantly as the feeling of being given something he hadn't earned. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said quietly. Just be worthy of it. She let a beat pass. Then, there's something else we need to discuss, Nathan. About Blackstone Meridian. He went very still. You know about Blackstone. I've known about Blackstone for 3 weeks, she said. I found it in the Trust's intelligence briefings. 3 weeks. While he had been scrambling to understand what was happening to his company, she had already been 3 steps ahead. Claire, I'm not going to let them take that company apart, she said. Her voice was calm and certain, the voice of someone who had already made her decision and was informing him of it, rather than discussing it. Not because of you, not for you, but because there are 2,300 people who work there who have nothing to do with what happened between us, and they don't deserve to lose their livelihoods because a private equity group wants to strip the assets and walk away. You're going to act, he said. I'm going to consider my options, she said, which is what someone in my position does. Carefully, on my own timeline. Of course, he said quickly. I'm not calling to pressure you. I want to be clear about that. Good, she said, because I wouldn't respond well to being pressured. I know, he said. And then with a wry quality that surprised even him, I think I'm only just now understanding how well I know that. She was quiet for a moment, and then quietly she laughed. Not a big laugh, a small one, brief and real. No, she said. No, you probably didn't. He let the moment sit. Then, can we talk in person? Not about the company. Just can we talk? The silence stretched out. He could hear her breathing. He could hear something in the background that might have been the wind outside a window or his own pulse. Not yet, she said finally. I'm not ready for that yet. Okay, he said. But Nathan, she paused. When I am ready, and I'll tell you when I need you to show up as who you actually are. Not who you've been performing, not the CEO, not the man who made the choices he made, just you, whatever's actually left of that. I don't know if what's left of that is very impressive, he said honestly. I didn't say it had to be impressive, she said. I said it had to be real. He sat alone in the conference room for a long time after she hung up. Outside, the city was doing its afternoon thing, loud and indifferent, and entirely without interest in the private earthquakes of one man's interior life. He thought about what she had said. Just you. Whatever's actually left of that. I thought about who he had been before Caldwell Innovations became what it was, before the valuations and the board meetings and the features in business magazines, before he became a version of himself that he had built deliberately the way you build a product optimized for performance and credibility and the impression it made on the people who mattered to a company's success. I thought about the 2-bedroom apartment in Austin, the borrowed laptop, the maxed-out credit card, the idea that everyone had called ambitious in the way people call things ambitious when they mean delusional. He thought about who had believed in that version of him, before the proof. He thought about a woman at a gallery opening in New York, standing in front of a painting and explaining it with such genuine enthusiasm that he had never wanted the conversation to end. He had spent 8 years building an empire. And in all that time, the most extraordinary person in his life had been standing quietly beside him, choosing him every single day, until the day he made sure she couldn't anymore. He had one chance now. He understood that. Not to win her back, he wasn't sure he had any right to that conversation yet, or maybe ever. But one chance to be in the wreckage of everything he had broken, something closer to the person she had originally seen. Whatever that took, however long it required. He picked up his phone and called Marcus Webb. I need you to do something for me, he said when Marcus answered. Something personal. Name it, Marcus said. "I need to know what Claire's favorite." He stopped, reconsidered, put the sentiment aside and replaced it with what was actually useful. "I need the name of her attorney, not the divorce attorney, the one handling the trust matters." Marcus paused. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to do this right," Nathan said, "I need to start by making sure the people around her know that I'm not the enemy, even if I've earned that reputation." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Nathan," he said carefully, "what are you actually trying to do here?" Nathan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "Something I should have started doing 2 years ago," he said, "paying attention. Back in Connecticut." Claire set her phone on the desk and sat quietly for a moment. Her father appeared in the doorway of the study with 2 cups of tea and the expression he always wore when he had something to say, but was waiting to be invited. "Come in, Dad," she said. He came in and set a cup in front of her and sat in the chair across from the desk. He looked at the phone. "Nathan." "Yes." "And?" She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and looked at her father across the desk that had belonged to her grandfather, and before that to her great-grandfather, and that had been the place where more significant decisions than anyone would ever publicly know had been made across 4 generations of Whitmore family life. "He's scared," she said, "but it's the right kind of scared." Her father tilted his head slightly. "The right kind. The kind that comes from finally seeing something clearly," she said. "Not from being caught. There's a difference." Her father considered that. "And what are you going to do?" She looked at the briefing documents on the desk. The Blackstone Meridian timeline, the shareholder analysis, the annotated board structure of Caldwell Innovations, with her own notes in the margins. "What I've been planning to do since I sat down at this desk," she said. "The right thing, in my own time, on my own terms." He nodded slowly. Then, with the quiet pride of a man who had waited a long time to see his daughter become who she had always been capable of being, "Your grandfather would have loved to see this." She picked up the letter from her cardigan pocket, the one from the envelope with the broken wax seal. She had read it twice in Richard Calloway's office, and now she read it a 3rd time. The last line read, "The only power worth having is the power you choose to use in service of something larger than yourself." She folded it carefully, placed it back over her heart. "Okay," she said softly, looking at the documents, looking at the numbers, looking at the future she was about to walk into, with her eyes completely open. "Let's get to work." William Edward Whitmore arrived on a Tuesday morning in March at 6:44 a.m., 6 pounds 11 ounces with his mother's eyes, and a cry that the delivering nurse described with genuine admiration as the most opinionated sound she had heard in 22 years of labor and delivery. Claire held him against her chest in the recovery room, while the world outside the hospital window was still deciding whether it was fully morning, and she felt something settle inside her that had been in motion for months. Not peace exactly, something more active than peace, something closer to certainty. Her father sat in the chair beside the bed. He had driven through the night to be there, which he would never mention, and which she would never forget. "He has your mother's forehead," Edward Whitmore said quietly. "Don't," Claire said. Her voice was rough from exhaustion and emotion. "I'm not," he said. "I'm just observing." She looked down at her son, at the impossible smallness of his fingers, at the way he had already found her heartbeat and was settling toward it the way people settle toward warmth. "William," she said softly, "you picked a complicated time to arrive." He did not appear concerned. She looked at her father over the top of William's head. "Has Nathan been notified?" "His attorney was informed an hour ago," her father said. "Not his attorney," she said. "Nathan." Edward Whitmore looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he took out his phone. "I'll handle it myself," he said. She nodded and looked back at her son and said nothing more about it. Edward Whitmore stepped into the hallway, found Nathan Caldwell's direct number in his contacts, a number he had never used before but had kept for 6 years because Edward Whitmore kept things he might need, and made the call. Nathan answered on the first ring. "Mr. Whitmore," he said. His voice was alert in the way of someone who had not been sleeping. "She had the baby," Edward said. "This morning, 6:44, a boy, 6 pounds 11 ounces. They're both healthy." A silence. Long enough that Edward would have checked the line if he hadn't been able to hear Nathan breathing on the other end. "Thank you," Nathan said finally. His voice had something in it that Edward had not expected and that he did not comment on. Tell her I'm glad they're both safe." You can tell her yourself, Edward said. When she's ready, not before. Yes, Nathan said. Of course. Edward ended the call and stood in the hospital corridor for a moment. Then he went back into the room where his daughter was holding his grandson, and he sat down in the chair, and he allowed himself in the privacy of that moment to feel the full weight of everything that had led to this morning. He had spent 6 years watching his daughter choose a man who did not understand what he had. He had said nothing because she had asked him to say nothing, and because he respected her enough to honor that. He had kept his distance and his silence, and he had kept the trust positioned in a way that meant she would never be without options whatever happened. He had been right to wait. He knew that. But being right and being comfortable were not the same thing, and the 2 years he had watched his daughter's marriage erode from the careful distance she had imposed had not been comfortable years. "Dad," Claire said without looking up from William. "Yes. Stop brooding. You'll upset the baby." Despite everything, Edward Whitmore almost smiled. Nathan did not come to the hospital. He had understood from Edward's tone and from his own hard-won new understanding of what Claire needed and didn't need from him that showing up uninvited would be the wrong move. He sent flowers instead. Simple ones, nothing performative. White tulips because they had been her favorites, and because he had remembered that despite everything. The card said only, "Congratulations. I'm glad you're both safe. Take all the time you need." Claire read the card twice, set it on the nightstand next to the ultrasound photograph that she had without quite deciding to brought with her to the hospital. She didn't say anything about it to anyone, but she didn't throw it away either. 3 weeks after William was born, something happened in the financial world that accelerated everything. Blackstone Meridian Capital made a formal public announcement of their intention to pursue a strategic acquisition of Caldwell Innovations. The announcement was carefully worded, as these announcements always were in the language of opportunity and value creation and shareholder benefit. But David Cho, who had been tracking Blackstone's movements for 2 months, called Nathan at 7 in the morning, the day it broke, and said 4 words. They moved up the timeline. Nathan was already at his desk. He had been at his desk since 5:30. He had been at his desk since 5:30 every morning for the past 3 weeks, which was the amount of time it took him to admit to himself that the only way through this was to work harder and smarter, and with a level of focus he had been withholding from his own company for longer than he wanted to acknowledge. "How much time do we have?" Nathan asked. "The board meeting is in 18 days, David said. "They need a shareholder vote. They've already locked Reeves and Hutchinson. If they can move 2 more institutional holders, they have the numbers. And our friendly block." A pause. "Still unknown," David said carefully. "The trust has made no public statement." Nathan set down his coffee. "I need to call Richard Calloway." "Nathan." David's voice shifted into a register that was more personal than professional. "You understand what that call means. If you're reaching out to the trust's legal counsel directly, you're making a move. It will be interpreted as pressure." "I know," Nathan said, "and if Claire decides to respond to it as pressure—" "She won't," Nathan said. Then more quietly, "But it doesn't matter. I'm not calling Richard Calloway about the company." A silence. "Then what are you calling him about?" "I'm calling him to ask if Claire will see me," Nathan said. "In person, without attorneys, without an agenda, just to see her." David Cho was quiet for a long moment. "That's a significant risk right now, Nathan. If it goes badly—" "Everything is already badly," Nathan said. "I'm not optimizing for not making it worse. I'm trying to do the actual right thing for once." He called Richard Calloway at 9 that morning. Richard listened to the request without interrupting. When Nathan finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Mr. Caldwell," Richard said finally, "I appreciate the directness. I'll relay the request to Claire. The decision is entirely hers." "I know," Nathan said. Tell her I'm not coming about Blackstone. I'm coming because I owe her a conversation that I've been too much of a coward to have." Another pause. "I'll relay that as well," Richard said carefully. "Thank you." He hung up and sat at his desk and waited. Claire received Richard's message that afternoon while William was asleep in the bassinet beside her chair, and she was working through a financial analysis that her father's team had prepared on Blackstone Meridian's debt structure. She read the message twice, set her phone down, picked it up, read it again. Then she called her father. "Nathan wants to come," she said. "I heard," her father said. "He had a talent for already knowing things. What do you think?" "I think," her father said carefully, "that what I think is not particularly relevant." "Dad." "Claire." His voice was gentle. "I have had opinions about Nathan Caldwell for 8 years. You know what they are. They haven't changed. But this is not my decision, and it never was." A pause. "What do you want?" She looked at William sleeping, at the small rise and fall of his chest, at the way his hands curled into loose fists, even in sleep already ready for something. "I want to look him in the eye," she said quietly. "Not for him, for me. I want to see what's actually there now." "Then let him come," her father said simply. She called Richard back and told him to pass the message Nathan could come. Saturday morning, 10 o'clock, the estate. Not the hospital, not a restaurant, not neutral territory in the modern, professionally managed sense of the word. The estate. Her ground, her history, the place where she had come back to herself. If he wanted a real conversation, he could come to where she was real. Nathan drove himself. He didn't take his driver, and he didn't bring Marcus, and he didn't consult with anyone about what he was going to say. He drove the 4 hours from Chicago to Connecticut in the kind of focused quiet that he associated with the hardest decisions he had ever made, and he thought about what Claire had said on the phone 3 weeks ago. "Just you. Whatever's actually left of that." I wasn't sure what was left. He was finding out. He arrived at 9:58. He sat in the car in the driveway for 2 full minutes, which was not something Nathan Caldwell did. He was a man who moved, who acted, who had built an entire identity around the forward momentum of relentless decision-making. Sitting still in a car at 5 minutes to 10 on a Saturday morning felt like the most honest thing he had done in years. At 10 exactly, he got out and walked to the front door. Mrs. Hargrove answered before he knocked. She looked at him with an expression that was neither warm nor hostile, and that communicated with the precision of someone who had been observing people for 50 years that he was being assessed and that the jury was still very much out. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said. "Thank you for—" "Through the hall," she said. "The study. She's waiting." He went through the hall, past the books and the framed photographs and the oil portrait of a man he recognized from financial history as Elias Whitmore, the grandfather who had built all of this. He walked through a house that was everything he had ever built, not being old and earned and full of people, rather than full of the performance of success. Claire was standing when he came in, not sitting behind the desk, standing beside it with her arms loose at her sides and her chin slightly lifted in the posture of someone who had decided to meet this moment on her feet. She looked different than the last time he had seen her, not just because of the physical changes of a pregnancy completed and a birth recovered from. Something in her face had changed. Some quality of guardedness was gone. Not softness, she had always been softer than he had appreciated, but an openness, a willingness to be seen completely that had the strange effect of making him feel very exposed in return. "Nathan," she said. "Claire." He stopped in the middle of the room. How is he?" "Sleeping," she said. "He eats and sleeps and occasionally informs the household of his opinions at considerable volume." A very small smile. "He's extraordinary." "He sounds like you," Nathan said. She looked at him for a moment. "Then sit down." He sat. She sat across from him, not behind the desk, but in the chair beside it, which he understood instinctively was a deliberate choice, not a power position, a person position. "You said you weren't coming about Blackstone," she said. "I'm not," he said. "Then what?" He folded his hands in front of him, then unfolded them. He had prepared things to say on the drive, and all of them felt wrong now that he was actually here, and she was actually looking at him with those steady brown eyes that had always seen more than he wanted them to. "I want to apologize," he said. "Not strategically, not because of what the company needs or what the situation requires. I want to apologize because I owe you one, and I've owed you one for a long time, and I have been a coward about it." She said nothing. She let him continue. "I stopped seeing you," he said. "That's the most honest way I can say it. Somewhere in the last 2 years, I stopped actually looking at you and started treating you like furniture in my life, something that was just there. And when I started feeling things I shouldn't have been feeling for someone at work instead of dealing with that, honestly, I told myself the marriage was already broken. I told myself you'd be okay. I told myself a lot of things that were convenient." He stopped. None of them were true. The room was very quiet. "The morning I put those papers on the table," he continued, "you asked me when I had decided, and I didn't answer you. The real answer is that I made the decision over the course of about 6 months of choosing badly in small ways every single day. None of it was one dramatic moment. It was just accumulation of the wrong choices. She was watching him carefully, not with anger, not with the cold distance he might have expected and might have deserved. With the same precise attention, she gave everything that mattered. "Victoria and I are no longer," he started. "I know," she said quietly. "She called me." He stopped. "She called you." "2 weeks ago," Claire said. "She called to tell me that she was stepping back from her role and that she wanted me to know she understood the damage that had been done and that she took responsibility for her part in it." A pause. "She also told me she thought you were trying to be better. She didn't ask me to forgive anyone. She just said it." Nathan sat with that for a moment. "I didn't know she called." "I know you didn't," Claire said. "That's partly why I'm telling you." He looked at his hands. "She's a good person," he said. "Yes," Claire said. "She is." A beat. "So are you, Nathan. You just forgot that for a while." He looked up at her. "I'm not absolving you," she said quickly. "What you did hurt me in ways I'm still working through, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's all okay because it's not all okay." She leaned forward slightly. "But I also know you. I know who you were when I met you. I know who you are underneath the CEO and the empire and all the layers you've built. And I don't think what you showed me in that kitchen 4 months ago was actually you. I think it was the worst version of you that you had allowed to take over because you stopped checking." I was quiet for a long moment. "How are you not angrier?" he asked finally. She almost laughed. "Oh, she said. "I was furious. For the first 2 weeks I was here, Mrs. Hargrove had to stop putting breakable things within my reach." He blinked. "Seriously." "I broke a soup bowl," she said. She pretended not to notice. He looked at her. And for the first time in months, something real passed between them. Not romance, not the easy warmth of a marriage that was working. Something more fundamental. The recognition of two people who had actually known each other in the deepest sense before everything went wrong. "I want to be part of William's life," he said. "I want to be present. Actually present, not just scheduled. I know I haven't earned the right to ask for anything beyond what the legal arrangement specifies, but I'm asking anyway, because he deserves a father who shows up." "I know," she said. "You can see him before you leave today if you want." He exhaled. "Yes," he said. "I want that." She nodded. Then she looked at the desk, at the documents he had been careful not to acknowledge since he came in. "And we do need to talk about Blackstone," she said. "Not because you came here for that, but because it's happening whether we discuss it or not, and I'd rather you know where I stand." He sat forward slightly. "Okay. I've made a decision," she said. "The trust is going to activate its position. We're going to make a public statement of alignment with current Caldwell Innovations management before the board meeting." She held up a hand before he could speak. "This is not a favor to you. I want to be absolutely clear about that. This is a decision I made based on what's right for 2,300 employees and for the long-term integrity of a company that, whatever its leadership problems, has built something real and valuable." She looked at him steadily. "The moment it stops being that, the moment I believe the company is being run in a way that harms the people who depend on it, I reserve the right to reconsider that alignment, completely, without negotiation." "I understand," he said. "Do you—" "Yes," he said. "Completely." She studied him. "There are conditions. Tell me." "The board needs to be restructured," she said. "Reeves and Hutchinson need to go, not just because of what they did with Blackstone, because of what they're doing it revealed about how the board operates. You've had too many yes people around you, Nathan. People who told you what you wanted to hear instead of what you needed to know." She paused. "That stops." "Agreed," he said immediately. "I'm also going to want regular visibility into the company's operations, not as interference, as oversight. The trust has a fiduciary responsibility to its own stakeholders, and I intend to take that seriously. My team will be in regular contact with your CFO." She paused. "Not with you directly, through proper channels." "Understood," he said. "And the culture," she said. Her voice shifted slightly, became more personal. "Nathan, I used to hear you talk about your people with real pride, real affection. When did you stop knowing their names?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Fix that," she said simply. He nodded. "Okay." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, and he stood, and she moved toward the door, and he followed her down the hallway and up the stairs to a room where William Edward Whitmore was sleeping in a bassinet near the window. Nathan stopped in the doorway. He looked at his son for a long time, at the dark hair and the tiny fists and the impossible, infuriating, overwhelming smallness of him. He thought about a 6-minute voicemail he had left from a hospital waiting room, his voice cracking, saying he wanted this more than he had ever wanted anything. He had not been wrong about that. He had just been wrong about everything surrounding it. "Can I?" he started. "Yes," Claire said quietly. He went to the bassinet and looked down at William for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised him because he had not planned it and had not known he was going to do it until he did it. He reached down and very gently placed one finger against William's hand. William in his sleep curled his fingers around it. It was the most Nathan Caldwell had been undone by anything in his adult life. He stood there for a moment and did not trust himself to speak. Then he straightened up and turned, and Claire was watching from the doorway with an expression he couldn't quite name, but that was not cold and not distant, and not the expression of a woman who was done with the person in front of her. "Thank you," he said. His voice was not entirely steady. "He's yours too," she said simply. "That's just a fact." They went back downstairs. In the hallway near the front door they stopped. The visit was over. The conversation had been said. Everything was at the beginning of something different now, not fixed, not resolved, not wrapped in the easy warmth of reconciliation, but begun. "Claire," he said. "Nathan," she said, "for what it's worth." He stopped. "I see you now. I know that's late. I know it doesn't change what I did, but I want you to know that I see you. Fully." She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I know, I can tell." A brief pause. "Drive safe." He nodded. He went to his car. He drove away from the Whitmore estate, and he did not turn the radio on for the entire 4 hours back to Chicago. He just drove in the silence and thought about a son who had curled his fingers around one of his, and a woman who had said, "I see you. I can tell." And he understood for the first time what it actually meant to be seen by someone who had no reason left to choose to look. Back at the estate, Claire returned to the study. She sat down at the desk. She pulled the briefing documents back in front of her. She had work to do, real, significant, consequential work that would determine the fates of thousands of people and the future of a company that had never known she was connected to it. She picked up her pen. She made a note in the margin of the Blackstone analysis. She circled a number. She drew an arrow. Then her father appeared in the doorway with 2 cups of tea and the expression he wore when he was proud of something and was not going to say so directly. "Well," he said. "Well," she said. And, "He held William's hand," she said. "He didn't know I was watching." Her father came in and set down the tea. He sat in the chair. He said nothing. "That's the real him," Claire said quietly. "That's the version that was always there. He just buried it." She looked at the documents. "People can bury themselves and still come back." "Sometimes," her father said carefully. "Sometimes," she agreed. She picked up her tea. "Okay, the board meeting is in 15 days. Walk me through the statement structure again." Her father opened his folder. "And Claire Whitmore, last heir of the Whitmore Legacy Trust, mother of William Edward Whitmore and the most consequential undisclosed shareholder in the history of Caldwell Innovations, got back to work. Because the man she had once loved was trying to become someone worth knowing again. And 2,300 people needed her to be sharper than her feelings. She was both things at once. She always had been. The board meeting was now 15 days away. Blackstone Meridian did not know what was coming. Gerald Reeves and Paul Hutchinson were still making calls they believed were secret. And somewhere in the financial machinery of one of America's most watched companies, a move was being prepared that none of the people trying to dismantle Caldwell Innovations had seen yet, because they had made the same mistake Nathan had made. They had looked at Claire Whitmore and seen a quiet wife. They had not looked carefully enough. 15 days felt like nothing and everything at the same time. Claire knew that feeling. She had learned it from her father, who had told her once that the most dangerous period in any significant decision was not the crisis itself, but the days leading up to it, when there was still enough time to make mistakes and not enough time to recover from them cleanly. She did not make mistakes in those 15 days. She worked with a focus that surprised even Richard Calloway, who had spent 26 years managing the affairs of a family not known for half measures. She was at her desk by 6 every morning. William fed and settled with Mrs. Hargrove, and she worked through documents and calls and strategic briefings with the methodical precision of someone who understood that the difference between a good outcome and a catastrophic one often lived in a single overlooked detail. Her father watched. He offered when asked. He stayed out of the way when not asked. It was, Claire thought, the best parenting he had ever done, and she told him so. He pretended not to be moved by that. He was completely moved by that. On day 3, she had a 2-hour call with David Cho, who had been Nathan's crisis advisor, and who she had reached out to directly, not through attorneys, not through intermediaries, but with a direct email that had said simply, "I understand you've been advising Nathan Caldwell on the Blackstone situation. I'd like to speak with you, not as opposing parties, as people who both want the same outcome. Please call me." David Cho called her within the hour. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "I have to say this is not the call I expected to be having." "Which call did you expect?" she asked. "Honestly, a call from your attorney telling us to stay out of the trust's lane." "That would have been simpler," she said. "But simple isn't the same as effective." She pulled up her notes. "Tell me what Nathan's team is actually missing, not what they've told you they're missing, what you see that they haven't said." A pause. Then David Cho said, "You know your husband is my ex-husband," she said, not harshly, just precisely. "Your ex-husband," he corrected, "is a genuinely good strategic thinker, but he has a blind spot. Tell me." "He trusts his own narrative too much," David said. "He built the story of Caldwell Innovations, and he believes it so completely that he sometimes can't see when the actual situation has moved away from the story. Blackstone is counting on that. They're not just making a financial play. They're making a narrative play. They're telling a better story to the shareholders who are wavering. And Nathan's defense so far has been to keep telling his original story louder." Claire was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. "What story should he be telling instead?" "That's the question," David said. "I have an answer," she said, "but it requires the board meeting to go in a specific sequence. I need to walk you through something." She walked him through it. All of it. The full structure of what she was planning in the order she was planning it, with the specific moments she needed to land in the specific way she needed them to land. When she finished, David Cho was quiet for almost 30 seconds. "Ms. Whitmore," he said finally. "Claire," she said. "Claire," he said, "I've been doing hostile takeover defense for 17 years. I have never, and I want to be clear that I mean never heard a plan structured quite like this. Is that good or bad? It's extraordinary," he said, "and it will work if Nathan lets you lead it." "Nathan," she said carefully, "doesn't need to let me do anything. The trust holds its position independently. I'm informing him of my plans as a professional courtesy, not as a request for permission." Another pause. "Right," David said, and she could hear in his voice that he was recalibrating something fundamental about how he had understood this entire situation. "Right, of course. But," she added, "I do need him to trust me, in the room, on the day. If he sees something he doesn't understand and reacts before I've finished it, falls apart." "I'll talk to him," David said. "Thank you." She ended the call and made a note and moved to the next item on her list. On day 7, Gerald Reeves made a mistake. He called Nathan, not to discuss board business, not through proper channels. He called Nathan's personal cell at 8:30 in the evening, which was either very confident or very stupid. And he said, "Nathan, I think we need to talk before this gets any uglier. There are things you don't understand about Blackstone's offer. Things that are actually good for the company, for you personally." Nathan recorded the call. He called Claire the next morning. "He called you directly," she said when Nathan told her, "at 8:30 at night. He's nervous," she said. "They're behind schedule on something and he's trying to stabilize Nathan. What did you say to him?" "I said I appreciated the call and I'd think about what he said." "Good," she said. "Claire," he implied. He very strongly implied that if I cooperated with Blackstone, I'd walk away from the transition with a personal package that would make the current Caldwell Innovations valuation look modest. She was quiet. "He was offering me a buyout of my own company," Nathan said, "in exchange for stepping aside." "I know," she said. "They tried the same approach with 2 of your institutional shareholders last week. Different framing, same mechanism." She paused. "Send me the recording." "Already sent," he said. "Nathan." Her voice shifted slightly, became more direct. I need to ask you something, and I need a completely honest answer. Okay. Was any part of you tempted? The line was quiet. For about 4 seconds, he said, when he said the number. A pause. And then I thought about 2,300 people, and I thought about William, and I thought about you sitting at that desk working on this, and the 4 seconds passed. Another pause. Is that honest enough? Yes, she said. That's honest enough. What do we do with the recording? Nothing yet, she said. We save it. It becomes part of the pattern of evidence I'm presenting to the board. You're presenting, Nathan said carefully. Yes, she said. I'm presenting. A pause. David told me about your plan, he said. He said it was extraordinary. It is, she said, not with arrogance, just with the clean confidence of someone who had checked her work 3 times and knew it held. He also said you told him you didn't need my permission. I don't, she said. No, he said, you don't. A beat. But I'm glad you told me anyway. I know, she said. And then because it was true, and because she believed in saying true things, you're doing better, Nathan. I want you to know that I see it. He didn't say anything for a moment. Thank you, he said finally. That means something. It should, she said. I don't say things I don't mean. She moved her pen to the next item on her list. I'll see you at the board meeting. I'll be there, he said. On day 11, the second twist arrived. Claire was in the middle of a call with her father's financial analysts when Richard Calloway knocked on the study door and came in with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Richard Calloway had a face built for composure. 26 years of managing the Whitmore family's affairs had given him a professional stillness that Claire had always found both reassuring and slightly inhuman. He looked shaken. She ended the call. Richard, she said. What happened? He set a document on the desk in front of her, a financial filing, fresh she could tell from the header date, filed that morning. She read the first paragraph, then read it again. Blackstone has a third board ally, she said. Morrison, Richard said quietly. Patricia Morrison, the board member who David Cho had described as nervous but aligned with management. The board member Nathan's team had believed was in their corner. Claire set the document down. When the filing was made this morning, the communication records our legal team pulled suggest the commitment was made 4 days ago. 4 days ago. While Claire had been on calls and in briefings and carefully constructing a plan that assumed a specific board vote distribution. 4 days ago, while Nathan's crisis team had been operating on intelligence that was already outdated. She looked at the numbers. With Morrison Blackstone now had 3 of 5 board votes. They had the majority they needed to push the acquisition to a shareholder vote. And if they got to a shareholder vote with the institutional holders they'd already secured, the math became very close to impossible. She sat back and looked at the ceiling for exactly 10 seconds. She counted them. Then she leaned forward and pulled her legal pad toward her. Okay, she said. We need to change the sequence. Claire, Richard said carefully, with 3 board votes, even the trust's position may not be enough to... Richard, she said, how much do we have liquid and deployable in the next 72 hours? He blinked. In the trust. Yes. He named a number. She wrote it on her legal pad. And if we call the Harrington Fund and exercise the cooperation clause in our investment agreement with them... A pause. Richard was doing math in his head. That would add... He named another number. She added them, looked at the total. And the Pemberton position, Dad transferred operational authority to me last week. Can we activate that? With your father's counter-signature, yes. Get him, she said. Richard went. She was already dialing David Cho. They have Morrison, she said when he answered. The silence on David's end lasted 2 full seconds, which for David Cho was the equivalent of anyone else's sharp intake of breath. When filed this morning, committed 4 days ago. That changes the board math completely. I know, she said, which is why we're not fighting this at the board level anymore. What do you mean? I mean, we go directly to the shareholders, she said. We bypass the board vote entirely. We make a public tender offer for a blocking position large enough that even if Blackstone wins the board vote, they cannot win the shareholder ratification without numbers they don't have. A pause. Claire, a tender offer of that scale in this timeline in this market is audacious, she said. Yes, I know. Can it be done? David was quiet for a moment. She could hear him thinking. It can be done, he said slowly, but Nathan's team can't be the ones to initiate it. If this comes from Caldwell Innovations directly, it looks defensive, and it spooks the retail shareholders. It needs to come from the trust, she said, as an independent shareholder action. Yes, David said. Yes, exactly. His voice had changed. The shock had converted itself into the sharp forward energy of someone who saw a path. And if the trust makes the tender offer, it frames the entire situation as an independent investor with a long history in the company standing up to protect it. That's a completely different story than management fighting to keep control. That's the story we need, she said. How fast can you move? 72 hours, she said. Can your team handle the technical structure on that timeline? We can be ready in 48, he said. Then let's move, she said. She spent the next 14 hours on the phone. She called her father, who countersigned the Pemberton activation without asking a single question except, "Are you sure?" and accepting her yes completely. She called the Harrington Fund's managing director, who she had met once at a family dinner when she was 19, and who remembered her apparently with more clarity than she had expected. She called Richard's team and walked them through the document structure they needed. She called David's team and reviewed the tender offer mechanics line by line. At 2 a.m, she fed William, who woke with his customary announcements about the state of the world, and she sat in the quiet of the nursery with him in her arms, and she talked to him in the low, steady voice she had developed over the past weeks. "We're going to be okay," she told him. "Not because everything worked out perfectly, because we kept working even when it didn't." She looked at his face, at the way he looked up at her with the complete, unquestioning trust of someone who did not yet know there was anything to doubt. "That's the thing your grandfather taught me. You don't wait for perfect conditions. You work with what you have, and you make the conditions better." William appeared to accept this. She put him back down and went back to her desk. At 6:45 in the morning, 4 days before the board meeting, the Whitmore Legacy Trust filed a formal tender offer for a blocking position in Caldwell Innovations. The filing was precise, professionally structured, and accompanied by a public statement that Claire had written herself in her own words without the softening assistance of a communications team. The statement said, in part, that the Whitmore Legacy Trust had held a long-term position in Caldwell Innovations since the company's earliest operational stage, that it had done so because it believed in the company's mission and in the genuine value it created for its employees, customers, and partners, and that it was taking this action not in opposition to any individual, but in defense of 2,300 people who came to work every day to build something real and who deserved to have someone in their corner. It did not mention Nathan by name. It did not need to. The financial press did not know what to do with it for approximately 45 minutes. Then they did what the financial press always does when it encounters something it finds genuinely surprising. They made a great deal of noise. By 9 a.m, Caldwell Innovations shares had moved significantly. By 11:03, of the institutional holders that Blackstone had been counting on had put their commitments on hold. By 1 p.m, Nathan's phone had received so many messages that Priya had started managing the queue in 30-minute blocks. Nathan called Claire at 1:15. "The statement," he said immediately when she answered. "Claire, the statement." "I told you what I was planning," she said. "I know you did. Just hearing it and seeing it are different things." He stopped. 2,300 people who deserve to have someone in their corner. That's you didn't have to frame it that way. "It's the true frame," she said simply. "Are you at the estate?" he asked. "Yes." "Can I come?" "Not for the company. I want to see William. I want to be there while this is happening. Not in the middle of it. I won't interfere. I just don't want to be in Chicago alone right now." She thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. "Come," she said. He drove. Again without his driver, again in the focused quiet of a man doing the interior work that didn't show on the outside. He arrived at 4 p.m, and Mrs. Hargrove let him in with an expression that had moved approximately 3 degrees in the direction of approval, which for Mrs. Hargrove was essentially a standing ovation. Claire was in the study. She looked up when he came in. She looked tired in the specific way of someone who had been working at full capacity for 11 days straight, and she looked at the same time more completely herself than he had seen her in years. "Sit down," she said. "I have 20 minutes before my next call." He sat. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," she said. And then because it was him, and because she had decided she was done performing composure, she didn't feel, "I'm exhausted. I haven't slept more than 4 hours in 2 nights, and William has opinions about 3 in the morning that I'm not fully equipped to argue with." She rubbed her eyes. "But I'm fine." "Let me take him tonight," Nathan said. She looked at him. "I know I don't have rights to," he started. "It's not about rights," she said. "Can you handle a newborn at 3 in the morning by yourself?" "No," he said honestly. "But I can sit with him so you can sleep. Mrs. Hargrove can supervise me." She almost smiled. "She'll enjoy that." "I know she will," he said. "But you need to sleep, Claire. You have 4 days until the most important meeting of this entire situation, and you need to be sharp." She looked at him, at the genuine concern on his face that was not strategic and not performed, and that she could see clearly because she had always been able to see him clearly, even when he had stopped being able to see himself. "Okay," she said, "tonight. But if he cries and you can't settle him, I'll wake Mrs. Hargrove immediately," he said. "I have no pride about this." "Good," she said. "That's new?" He accepted that without deflecting it. "Yes," he said. "It is." Her phone buzzed. The 20 minutes were up. She reached for it, then stopped. "Nathan, in 4 days in that board meeting, I need you to trust me completely, even if you see something you don't understand, even if it looks for a moment like it's going wrong. I need you to stay quiet and trust me." "I trust you," he said. "You've trusted me for 20 minutes at a time for the past several weeks," she said. "I need you to trust me for 3 hours straight in a room full of people who are going to be extremely uncomfortable and not flinch." He held her gaze. "I trust you," he said again, more slowly, more completely. She nodded, picked up the phone, got back to work. He sat quietly in the corner of the study, not interfering, not offering, and watched the woman he had spent 8 years failing to see do the most extraordinary thing he had ever witnessed in his professional life. He watched her manage a hostile takeover defense with the precision of a surgeon and the composure of someone who had decided long ago that the right thing was worth doing, regardless of how hard it was to do. He sat there and he was, for the first time in years, genuinely humble in the presence of another person. The day of the board meeting arrived on a Thursday. Claire wore gray, simple, precise, the color of someone who did not need to announce themselves because the work was going to do it for them. She drove with her father, who sat in the back seat and reviewed documents and said nothing that wasn't necessary, which was, she had always thought, his greatest gift. The Caldwell Innovations boardroom was on the 34th floor of the Chicago headquarters. She had been in this building before at company events and the occasional dinner, always as Nathan's wife, always in the specific role of CEO's spouse, which had its own invisible uniform and its own invisible rules. She had always played the role correctly. She had always known it was a role. Today she was not playing a role. She walked into the building with her father beside her and Richard Calloway and 2 other members of her legal team behind her, and she rode the elevator to the 34th floor, and she walked into the boardroom at exactly 9:58. Nathan was already there. He was standing at the far end of the room with David Cho and Marcus Webb, and when he saw her come in, he did something she didn't expect. He crossed the room immediately, directly, without hesitation, and he said, "Good morning. Thank you for being here." Not as a husband, not with any of the emotional weight of their history, as a professional, as someone who understood what she was doing here and had the basic decency to acknowledge it directly. "Good morning," she said. She looked around the room. Gerald Reeves and Paul Hutchinson were at the far end of the table. They both looked at her with expressions that were working very hard to be neutral. Patricia Morrison was in the middle, looking at her documents, not at the door. And at the head of the table, representing Blackstone Meridian Capital, was a man named Stuart Gaines, who was 54 years old, who wore the particular kind of confidence that came from 2 decades of acquiring and dismantling companies, and who had clearly not been briefed on exactly who was walking into this room today. He looked at Claire when she entered, then at the Whitmore name on the placard in front of her seat, then back at her. He had expected an elderly shareholder representative, or a lawyer, or possibly Edward Whitmore himself, whom he had clearly prepared for. He had not prepared for Claire. She sat down. She opened her portfolio. She took out her documents and arranged them in front of her with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this 100 times, which she had not, but she had prepared for it as though she had. The board chair, a man named Robert Chen, who had remained solidly in Nathan's corner throughout, called the meeting to order at 10 o'clock precisely. For the first 40 minutes, everything went according to Blackstone's plan. Stuart Gaines presented his acquisition thesis with polished confidence. The three board members who had committed to Blackstone's position nodded at the right moments, and two institutional representatives in the room who had wavered asked questions that had clearly been pre-coordinated. The room had the feeling of a conclusion that had already been reached being performed for the record. Nathan sat at the other end of the table and said almost nothing. Claire could feel the effort it was costing him. She caught his eye once briefly, and she held it for a moment, and he gave the smallest possible nod and looked back at the table. He was trusting her. At 10:42, Stuart Gaines finished his presentation and looked around the room with the expression of a man who believes the game is over and is already thinking about the celebration. Robert Chen said, "Thank you, Mr. Gaines. At this time, I'd like to recognize the representative of the Whitmore Legacy Trust." Stuart Gaines looked at Claire. She stood up. She did not have a presentation deck. She had documents, physical ones, and she had her voice, and she had 11 days of preparation, and she had the full, undiluted attention of everyone in the room. "Thank you, Mr. Chen," she said. She looked at the board, at Reeves and Hutchinson, who were carefully not meeting her eyes, at Morrison, who was, at Gaines, who was watching her with the focused attention of someone who has just realized the situation is different than he understood. "I want to begin by saying something that might be surprising. I'm not here to oppose this acquisition because of any personal interest in the outcome. I am here because the Whitmore Legacy Trust has held a position in this company for 8 years, and in that time I have watched this company be built by real people doing real work. And I have a responsibility to those people that does not bend to financial pressure or board politics." She picked up the first document. "What I am about to present is a pattern of conduct," she said, "not a set of allegations, a documented source time-stamped pattern of conduct that began approximately 8 months ago and that involves individuals in this room." Gerald Reeves shifted in his seat. She put the first document in front of Robert Chen. "This is a record of communications between Stuart Gaines and Gerald Reeves," she said, "dating back to October. In these communications, Mr. Reeves shares non-public information about Caldwell Innovations' strategic planning that he was legally obligated as a board member to protect." The room went very still. "This," she continued, placing the second document, "is a record of a personal financial arrangement offered to Paul Hutchinson by Blackstone Meridian Capital Contingent on his board vote. A board member accepting personal financial benefit in exchange for a vote is not a gray area. There is a word for it." Paul Hutchinson's face had gone the color of old paper. "And this," she said, placing a third document in front of Patricia Morrison specifically, "is a transcript of a conversation your own assistant had, without your knowledge, with a Blackstone representative 4 days ago. The conversation includes a description of the personal pressure that was applied to you to secure your commitment." She looked directly at Morrison. "You were told that if you did not align with Blackstone, information damaging to your professional reputation would be made public." She paused. "That is coercion, and you don't have to honor a commitment made under coercion." Patricia Morrison looked at the document. Her hands were very still on the table. Claire let the silence sit for exactly 4 seconds. Then she looked at Stuart Gaines. "Mr. Gaines," she said, "the Whitmore Legacy Trust has in the past 72 hours completed a tender offer securing a 39% blocking position in Caldwell Innovations. Combined with the management-aligned institutional holders, we have more than sufficient cover to defeat this acquisition at the shareholder ratification stage, regardless of the board vote today." She paused. "This move is over." The room was silent. Stuart Gaines looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his own attorneys, who were exchanging urgent glances. Then he looked back at her. "Ms. Whitmore," he said carefully, "these are serious allegations." "They are documented facts," she said. "The documentation has already been shared with the SEC this morning at 8 a.m. She looked at him without blinking. "You are welcome to verify that." Gaines looked at Reeves. Reeves looked at Hutchinson. Neither of them said anything. Nathan Caldwell sat at his end of the table and did not speak and did not move, and his face was completely composed, and only the way his hands were flat on the table, very deliberately flat, suggested anything about what it was costing him. Robert Chen said very quietly, "I think we should take a recess." "Of course," Claire said. She sat down. She placed her hands in her lap. She was completely, utterly calm. Her father, seated one chair to her left, looked straight ahead. Under the table very briefly, he put his hand over hers. She turned her hand over and held it. The recess lasted 22 minutes. When they came back, Gerald Reeves and Paul Hutchinson both said they had reconsidered their positions. Patricia Morrison said she wished to make a formal statement about the conditions under which her prior commitment had been made. Stuart Gaines sat in a silence that was the silence of a man calculating losses rather than strategies. The acquisition motion failed 4-1. The one vote in favor was Gaines himself, who had no board standing to vote, and whose presence in the room had just become significantly more complicated. After the vote, as people stood and gathered their papers, and the room moved in the direction of its various exits, Nathan crossed to Claire's side of the table. He stood in front of her and he said, "Claire." She looked at him. "Thank you," he said. "I know that's inadequate. I know there's nothing I can say in this room that covers the actual weight of what you just did, but thank you." She looked at him for a moment. "Don't thank me," she said. "Do better. That's all I want." He nodded. Just once, but completely. She picked up her portfolio. She walked out of the boardroom with her father beside her and Richard Calloway, and the quiet certainty of someone who had done exactly what she had come to do, and not one thing more. In the elevator, her father stood beside her and said nothing. The doors opened on the lobby. "Dad," she said. "Yes, let's go home." He looked at his daughter, at the woman who had walked into that room and taken apart a hostile takeover with documents and composure and the particular kind of courage that doesn't announce itself. "Yes," he said. "Let's go home." They walked out of the building together into the Chicago afternoon, and the city moved around them with its usual magnificent indifference, and Claire Whitmore breathed the cold air and thought about William asleep at the estate, and about 2,300 people who would go to work tomorrow and not know how close it had come. That was fine. They didn't need to know. She knew. That was enough. The drive back to Connecticut took 4 hours and 11 minutes. Claire slept for most of it. Her father sat beside her in the back seat and let her sleep, and did not check his phone more than 3 times, which for Edward Whitmore in the aftermath of a significant financial event was an act of extraordinary self-discipline. Richard Calloway rode in the front seat and handled the calls that needed handling, and the Connecticut countryside came toward them through the windows, and the afternoon turned into early evening, and Claire slept the way people sleep when they have been carrying something enormous for a very long time and have finally carefully set it down. She woke 40 minutes from home. She sat up, looked out the window, looked at her father. "Did anything break while I was asleep?" she asked. "Nothing that Richard couldn't handle," her father said. "Gaines." "His attorneys called at 3:15, Richard said from the front seat without turning around. "They're exploring the appropriate language for a formal withdrawal. The SEC acknowledgement of our filing was confirmed at 3:40. And Marcus Webb called to say the Caldwell Innovations share price closed up 11%. She absorbed all of that. "And Nathan," a brief pause. "He called once," her father said. "I told him you were sleeping. He said good she needs it and hung up." She looked at her father. "That's new," she said quietly. "Yes," her father agreed. "It is." She looked back out the window. The estate came into view as the car turned through the gates, and she felt what she always felt when she came back to it now. Not the complicated mixture of love and resistance that had defined her relationship with this place for most of her adult life, but something cleaner. Something that felt simply like belonging. Mrs. Hargrove was waiting at the door. She looked at Claire the way she had been looking at Claire for the past 6 weeks, which was the way a person looks at someone they have watched go through fire and come out the other side still standing. "He's awake," Mrs. Hargrove said. "Fed 20 minutes ago, very pleased with himself." Claire went straight upstairs. She went to the nursery. She picked up William, who was lying in his bassinet, examining the ceiling mobile with the focused intensity he brought to everything, and she held him against her chest and pressed her face into his hair and stood there for a long moment, saying nothing at all. She felt his small hands press against her collarbone. She felt his weight, which was a real and specific and irreplaceable weight, the weight of an actual person who existed because she existed. "We did it," she told him softly. "I know you don't know what that means yet, but we did it." William made a sound that she chose to interpret as agreement. She carried him downstairs and sat in the study with her father, and Mrs. Hargrove brought tea, and the evening settled around them, and for the first time in 6 weeks, no one opened a briefing document. The days that followed the board meeting moved differently than the days before it. slower in some ways, fuller in others. The particular compressed urgency of a crisis resolved leaves a specific kind of space behind it, and Claire had learned from her grandfather's letter and her father's example that what you did with that space mattered as much as what you had done in the crisis. She did not disappear from the Trust's affairs. She had accepted in the Whitmore study on the night she returned from Chicago that she was not going to be the person she had tried to be for the first 6 years of her adult life, the person who kept her distance from her family's power and built something smaller on her own terms. That person had been real, and those choices had been genuine, and she did not regret them. But they were not who she was now. Now she was William's mother and the operational heir of the Whitmore Legacy Trust and the person who had walked into a boardroom and dismantled a hostile takeover through preparation and honesty and the refusal to be underestimated. She was all of those things at once, and the version of herself that tried to be only one of them at the expense of the others was a version she was done performing. She called Richard Calloway on the Monday after the board meeting. "I want to begin the formal transition process," she said. "Not in stages, the full transfer of trust operational authority into my name. I want to be active, Richard, not as a figurehead, as the actual decision-maker." "Your father anticipated this," Richard said. "Did he say anything?" "He said, and I'm quoting finally." She laughed, really laughed for the first time in weeks. The sound surprised her, its realness. "Set up the meetings," she said. Meanwhile, at Caldwell Innovations, Nathan Caldwell was doing something he had not done in at least 2 years. He was learning the names of the people who worked for him. Not the executives, not the department heads, the actual people, the engineers and the product managers and the people in customer support, and the woman who ran the employee wellness program, and the man who had been maintaining the server infrastructure since the company was 18 months old, and who Nathan had walked past in the hallway for 3 years without ever once stopping to say thank you. He started stopping. It was uncomfortable at first in the way that anything authentic is uncomfortable when you have spent years inside performance. People were surprised. Some were visibly uncertain about whether this was a new corporate initiative or something real. Nathan understood why they were uncertain, and he did not take it personally. He had given them reasons to be uncertain. The only response to that was consistency over time. Marcus Webb noticed within the first week. "You're different," Marcus said on a Wednesday morning when they were walking between meetings. "I'm trying to be," Nathan said. "What happened?" Marcus asked. And then, because Marcus had known Nathan for 9 years and earned the right to be direct, "I don't mean the board meeting, I mean you. What happened to you?" Nathan thought about it honestly, the way he was trying to think about things now. "I think I spent a very long time confusing the company I built with who I actually was," he said. "And when someone showed me very clearly that those are different things, I had to decide what to do with that." "Claire," Marcus said. "Yes," Nathan said. "Claire." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "How is she?" "She's good," Nathan said. "She's really good." He paused. "She's extraordinary, Marcus. I always knew that on some level, but I didn't understand the scale of it. I didn't actually see it." "And now you do?" Marcus said. "And now I do?" Nathan said. "About 6 years too late, but yes." They walked in silence for a moment. Then Marcus said, "Are you going to try to—" "No," Nathan said immediately. Then more carefully, "I don't know. I'm not doing anything with that yet. She's not ready, and honestly, I'm not sure I'm ready. There's a lot I need to demonstrate before that conversation is even possible." He paused. "Right now, I'm just trying to be worthy of being William's father. That's enough to focus on." Marcus nodded. "That's actually the most mature thing I've ever heard you say." "Don't tell anyone," Nathan said. "I have a reputation to manage." Marcus almost smiled. The reputation of a man who just had his company saved by his ex-wife. "The reputation," Nathan said with a wry quality that was new and genuine, of a man who is working on it. 3 weeks after the board meeting, Nathan came to the estate for the second time. This visit had been arranged through Claire directly, not through attorneys, not through intermediaries. She had called him on a Sunday evening and said, "William has started doing this thing when he sees faces he recognizes. I thought you should see it." And Nathan had said yes before she finished the sentence. He arrived on Saturday morning. Mrs. Hargrove let him in with the expression that had now moved to approximately 7 degrees in the direction of approval. He thought that was probably the best he was going to get from Mrs. Hargrove, and he accepted it gratefully. Claire was in the sitting room with William on a blanket on the floor, and she looked up when Nathan came in with an expression that was open and careful, and not performing either distance or warmth. Just the actual complicated human thing of someone who was still figuring out what another person meant to them. "He's been up since 5, she said. "He has thoughts." Nathan sat on the floor across from his son, which was not something Nathan Caldwell did in the general course of his life, and which he did now without hesitation. He looked at William. William looked at him. Then William's face did something. A movement of recognition, the dawning brightness of a small person who had catalogued a face and found it in the room, and he made a sound that was not quite a word, but was not a word either, a sound of greeting that came from somewhere completely unguarded and completely real. Nathan felt it in his chest, like something physical. "There it is," Claire said softly. He looked at her. She was watching William with the expression she always wore with him, that particular quality of wonder that had not diminished in the weeks since his birth, and that Nathan now understood was not sentiment, but genuine astonishment, the daily renewing shock of loving someone that much. "Claire," he said. "Nathan," she said without looking up from William. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want to be clear that I'm not asking because of the situation with the company, and I'm not asking because of what happened at the board meeting, and I'm not asking because of what I owe you, which is a great deal. I'm asking because it's the true thing, and I've decided I'm only going to say true things now." She looked up at him. "I would like to take you to dinner," he said. "At some point. Not this week, not next week, whenever you're ready, or never if you're never ready. But I would like to ask, as a person, not as your ex-husband, or as William's father, or as the CEO of Caldwell Innovations. Just as the person who met you at a gallery in New York and knew within 20 minutes that you were the most interesting person he had ever met, and then spent 8 years not paying adequate attention to that fact." The room was very quiet. William on his blanket was examining his own hand with the concentrated interest of a scientist encountering a new phenomenon. Claire looked at Nathan for a long moment. She looked at him the way she looked at everything that mattered completely, without flinching, with the full attention of someone who had decided that the truth was worth seeing, even when it was complicated. "Ask me again in 3 months, she said finally. He held her gaze. "Okay," he said. "I'm not saying no," she said. "I'm saying I need 3 months to know the difference between who you're trying to be and who you actually are. Anyone can try for a few weeks. 3 months tells you something real." "That's fair," he said. "It's very fair," she said. "It's more than fair." "I know," he said. "I'll ask again in 3 months." She nodded. She looked back at William, and then quietly she said, "For what it's worth, I see the trying Nathan. I see it every time you come here and you sit on the floor and you don't make it about you. I see it in the way you talk about the company now. I see it." She paused. 3 months will tell me if it's permanent." He sat with that. He let it be exactly what it was, not a promise, not a door closed, not a door fully open, an honest assessment from an honest person, which was, he was beginning to understand the most valuable thing one person could offer another. "Okay," he said simply. They sat on the floor with their son between them, and the morning moved around them, and nobody rushed anything. The twist that nobody had expected arrived 6 weeks after the board meeting, and it arrived not as a crisis, but as a revelation. It came in the form of a letter. Not an email. A physical letter, hand-addressed, delivered to the Whitmore estate through the Trust's formal correspondence channel. The return address was a law firm in Boston that Claire did not immediately recognize. Richard Calloway identified it in under 2 minutes as the firm that had managed the legal affairs of Elias Whitmore Claire's grandfather for the last 12 years of his life. She opened it at her desk on a Thursday morning with William in the baby seat beside her, and her coffee going cold in the way it always did now, because she was always doing 3 things at once. Inside was a single document, a codicil to her grandfather's will, filed 11 years ago, the year before he died, and sealed with instructions that it be delivered to Claire personally only after 2 conditions were met simultaneously. The first condition was that she formally assumed operational authority of the trust. The second condition was that she demonstrated in her grandfather's specific language the courage to use what she was given in service of something larger than herself. Richard Calloway had determined apparently that the board meeting qualified. She read the codicil twice. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling. Her grandfather had known. Not about Nathan specifically, not about a divorce or a hostile takeover or a son named William, but he had known with the particular foresight of someone who had watched people reveal themselves under pressure across 7 decades of consequential life that there would come a moment when his granddaughter had to choose between safety and significance. And he had prepared for that moment 11 years in advance in a sealed document, and he had trusted her to find her way to it. The codicil transferred to Claire directly and irrevocably a secondary portfolio of trust assets that had been held in a separate structure since 1987. The value of those assets at current market rates was something that even Claire, who had spent the past 6 weeks becoming deeply familiar with the trust's financial structure, had not known existed. She called her father. "Did you know about the codicil?" she asked without preamble. A pause, 1 beat too long. "Dad, I knew there was a sealed document," he said carefully. "I did not know its contents. Your grandfather was very deliberate about that. He told me it existed, and he told me the conditions, and he told me that when both conditions were met, I would know because you would have become the person he always believed you were capable of being." A pause. He was right. She sat with that for a long moment. "He was watching all along," she said. Her father said. "He always said you were the one. Not because of what you would inherit, because of what you would choose." She looked at William, who had fallen asleep in the baby seat with the particular abandon of small people who have decided the world is safe enough to fully let go in. She thought about an old man she had loved completely and lost too young, who had seen something in her that she had spent her adult life trying to live up to and then trying to live away from, and had finally at 34, sitting on the floor of her grandfather's study, with her son sleeping beside her, decided simply to live toward. She thought about what he had written at the end of that letter. She still carried over her heart. "The only power worth having is the power you choose to use in service of something larger than yourself." She hadn't understood it fully when she first read it. She understood it now. She picked up the phone and called Nathan. He answered immediately. "Claire, is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," she said. "I have something I want to tell you. Not about the company, not about us, about something my grandfather did." She paused. "Are you somewhere you can talk?" "I'll make myself somewhere," he said. She heard a door close. "I'm here." She told him about the codicil, about the sealed document and the conditions in the portfolio she hadn't known existed. She told him about her grandfather's letter and what it said about the kind of power worth having. When she finished, Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Claire," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What are you going to do with it, the portfolio?" She had been thinking about that since she hung up with her father. She had been thinking about it with the same focused, unhurried attention she brought to every decision that mattered. "I've been watching what happens when money moves without any accountability to human beings," she said slowly. "The Blackstone situation, the way Reeves and Hutchinson behaved, the way institutions can aggregate so much capital that they stop seeing the people on the other side of their decisions." She paused. "I want to build something that moves in the opposite direction, an investment structure specifically designed to protect companies at vulnerable moments, not to take them over, to stand with them, to be the thing that shows up when a Blackstone shows up." The line was quiet. "You want to build what you just did for Caldwell Innovations," Nathan said slowly, "but systematically, for other companies." "Yes," she said. "Claire," his voice had something in it, that's not a small idea." "No," she said, "it's not. You're going to need people who understand that space, operationally, legally, financially. You're going to need—" "I know what I'm going to need," she said. "I have my father, I have Richard, I have David Cho, who has already said he's interested, and I have my grandfather's portfolio, which is," she named the number, "silence." "Nathan," she said, "I am telling you this not as a business proposal. I am telling you this because you asked me what I was going to do with it, and I have decided I am done keeping things to myself that I should be saying out loud." She paused. "I don't want to keep things from you the way I kept things from you before. Even if we don't know yet what we are to each other, we are William's parents, and William deserves parents who communicate honestly." I was quiet for a long moment. "I agree," he said. "Completely." "Good," she said. "So now you know." "Now I know," he said. "And then, for what it's worth, your grandfather's assessment was correct." She didn't answer immediately. "Claire," he said, "I mean that. Whatever else I am and whatever I fail to do and whatever I have to spend the next years making right, I know how to recognize something extraordinary when I finally stop looking in the wrong direction long enough to see it." His voice was steady. "You are extraordinary, not because of the trust or the portfolio or what you did in that boardroom, because of who you are when nobody's watching. I just wish it hadn't taken me this long to understand the difference." She held the phone against her ear and looked at William sleeping, and at the afternoon coming through the study window, and at the desk that had belonged to 3 generations of Whitmore men and now belonged to her. 3 months, Nathan," she said softly. 3 months, he said. She hung up and sat in the quiet and let it all be exactly as complicated and as real and as full of genuine possibility as it was. The months that followed were the most clarifying of Nathan Caldwell's adult life. He restructured the Caldwell Innovations Board. Gerald Reeves and Paul Hutchinson were gone within 2 weeks of the board meeting, removed not in anger, but with the cold, precise efficiency of a man who had finally understood that the people in his inner circle needed to be there because they were genuinely good, not because they were convenient. He brought in 2 new board members, one from the technology space and one with a background in organizational culture, and he told them both explicitly on their first day, "If I stop listening, tell me. If I start surrounding myself with yes people again, tell me. That is the specific thing I am asking you to do." They both looked at him like they were trying to determine if he was serious. He was serious. He called a company-wide meeting 3 weeks after the board restructuring, not a polished, produced event. He stood in the main atrium of the Chicago headquarters, and he talked to his people directly, without a prepared speech, for 37 minutes. He told them what had happened with Blackstone Meridian, not the sanitized version, the actual version. He told them how close it had come. He told them about the people who had betrayed the company's trust and what had happened to them. He told them about the person who had saved the company and why she had done it. He said her name. "Claire Whitmore held a position in this company for 8 years that none of you knew about and that I did not fully appreciate," he said. "She used that position to protect this company, and more importantly to protect you, at a moment when she had absolutely no personal reason to do so. She did it because she believed in what this company is supposed to stand for." He paused. "I want us to spend the next year becoming worthy of that." The room was very quiet. Then someone in the back started clapping, and then the person beside them, and then the room. Nathan stood there and let it be awkward and real and human, which it was, and he did not retreat into the performance of executive composure that would have been easier. He stood there and felt it. Marcus Webb found him afterward in the hallway outside the atrium. He didn't say anything. He just put his hand briefly on Nathan's shoulder. Nathan nodded. They walked on. At the estate, Claire watched the clip of the meeting that someone had recorded and posted without audio because the company's recording policy didn't allow it, but the images were enough. She saw Nathan standing in front of his people without notes and without the particular performed confidence that had always marked his public appearances, and she saw the room respond, and she watched his face while they responded, and saw something there that was completely unguarded. She sat with her phone in her lap for a long moment afterward. Then she called her father. "Have you seen the clip?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "What do you think?" A pause. "I think," Edward Whitmore said carefully, "that the man is doing the actual work." He paused again. "Your grandfather used to say you could always tell the difference between a person who had been humbled and a person who had been changed. Humbled people perform their contrition. Changed people just live differently." She was quiet. "What do you think?" her father asked. She looked at William, who was lying on the blanket in the sitting room, being supervised by Mrs. Hargrove, doing the thing he had started doing recently, where he grabbed his own foot and appeared genuinely astonished to discover it was attached to him. "I think," she said, "that in about 6 weeks someone is going to ask me to dinner." Her father was quiet for a moment. "And," he said, "and," she said, "I think I'm going to say yes." She heard her father exhale, a long, slow exhale, the exhale of a man who had been patient for a very long time. "Good," he said, simply, without elaboration. She smiled. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Dad." "I'm not getting ahead of anything," he said. "I'm 71 years old, and I have a grandson. I'm exactly where I want to be." She hung up and looked at William and thought about what it meant to be exactly where you want to be. She thought about the gallery in New York 14 years ago, and the painting she had been standing in front of, and the man who had asked her to explain it, and the 8 years that had followed in all their beauty and failure and accumulated loss. She thought about a kitchen in Chicago, and cold tea on a counter, and divorce papers on a table. She thought about the drive to Connecticut, and the sealed letter, and her grandfather's handwriting, and 11 years of a man she had loved. Planning quietly for the moment she would find her way to herself. She thought about a boardroom on the 34th floor and 2,300 people who had gone home that evening, not knowing how close it had come. She thought about William curling his fingers around one of Nathan's in the nursery, and the way Nathan's face had been in that moment the truest thing she had ever seen. She thought about 3 months. 6 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in autumn, Nathan Caldwell drove himself to the Whitmore estate. He arrived at 10, which was, she had come to understand simply who he was, a man who arrived precisely when he said he would, which was maybe a small thing, or maybe not a small thing at all. Mrs. Hargrove opened the door. She looked at him. Then she opened the door wider and stepped aside and said, "She's in the garden with William." Nathan looked at Mrs. Hargrove. Mrs. Hargrove, who did not smile easily and had not smiled at Nathan Caldwell in any of his previous visits to the estate, allowed one corner of her mouth to move approximately 2 degrees in the direction of warmth. "Go on," she said. He went. Claire was sitting on the bench near the old oak tree her grandfather had planted with William in her arms, and the autumn light was coming through the leaves the way it does in Connecticut in October, gold and precise, and without any sentimentality about how beautiful it is. She looked up when she heard him coming. She looked at him the way she looked at things that mattered fully without flinching. He stopped a few feet away. "Nathan," she said. "Claire," he said. "It's been 3 months." She looked at him for a long moment. William in her arms looked at Nathan and did the recognition thing, the brightening, the small sound of greeting. "I know," she said. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said, "whenever you're ready." She stood up. She shifted William to her hip. She looked at the man in front of her, not the CEO, not the person who had failed her, not the version of himself he had spent 8 years building and 2 years dismantling and 6 months rebuilding from something more honest. Just the actual person. The one who had cried in a voicemail, the one who had sat on the floor, the one who had stood in an atrium and said her name in front of 2,000 people without flinching. "Saturday," she said. 7 o'clock, and you're choosing the restaurant." He exhaled. Something in his face changed. Not dramatically, quietly, the way real things change without announcement. "Okay," he said. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." She held his gaze. "Don't waste it this time." He held her gaze back. "I won't," he said. And it was not a performance, and it was not a promise made easily. It was a statement of fact from a man who had looked at himself clearly for 6 months and understood completely and without deflection what was at stake. She nodded once. She put William in his arms. William grabbed Nathan's collar with both hands and held on with the grip of a person who has decided without consultation or condition that this is where he wants to be. And Nathan Caldwell stood in the autumn light under his grandfather-in-law's oak tree, holding his son for the first time outdoors in the world, with the woman he had failed, and found his way back towards standing 2 feet away, watching him with clear brown eyes that had always seen more than he deserved. He had not won her back. He understood that. He had not earned forgiveness on a schedule or redeemed himself through a single act of appropriate humility. He had simply slowly, consistently chosen better, day after day, in the small moments that nobody watched and in the large ones that everyone did. That was the only path that existed. He knew that now. Claire Whitmore had not built herself from grief or bitterness or the need to prove something to the man who had underestimated her. She had built herself from what had always been there, the intelligence and the values and the capacity for love that she had offered freely and fully to someone who hadn't known how to receive it. She had been the most powerful person in the room her entire life. She had simply been waiting for the room to catch up. Nathan had finally caught up. William had one hand wrapped around his father's collar, and the other reaching toward his mother, and Claire took his small hand in hers, and the 3 of them stood together in the October light, and nobody said anything, because nothing needed to be said. Some things do not require words. They require time and honesty, and the willingness to keep showing up after you have given someone every reason to close the door. Claire Whitmore had never needed rescuing. She had never needed to be seen to be real. but she had chosen against the evidence and in full knowledge of the risk to give someone else the chance to finally become the person he was always capable of being. That was not weakness. That was the most courageous thing she had ever done. And it was in the end entirely, completely, and irrevocably hers.